Let's hunt down this wild treasure. A legendary map claimed the unmatched martial arts and secret weapon of Gija, the greatest warrior in Murim history, were hidden deep inside the dangerous region of Hangan. This map instantly ignited the peaceful Murim world. But then boom, a massive mountain split completely in half, and out stumbled a young man who had finally escaped his long imprisonment. The sky above was blue, just like he remembered. Maybe leaving that place was a total shock to his system. But no matter how hard he tried, his memories before entering were completely gone. Still, he had to remember everything to get his ultimate revenge. His very first memory started at 10 years old. An old master named Giha told a group of kids they probably wouldn't believe him, but in 10 years, they would have to save the entire world. 100 young orphans were rounded up by Gija, and our boy was one of them. He still vividly remembered the chillingly calm eyes of the master, who demanded absolute obedience from all of them. The very next day, their grueling martial arts training officially began. Our boy felt absolutely no fear as an orphan. He had nothing left to lose anyway. Changa warned that the cave entrance was sealed by massive solid rock to stop anyone from escaping, and warned that outsiders trying to break in would face a terrible fate. Their entire lives, from eating to sleeping, were strictly monitored. They had zero freedom. The very first martial art they were forced to learn was simply how to breathe. This was the art of three energies, a mystical technique that gathered energy from heaven, earth, and humanity. Next came swordplay, the legendary sword of three energies. After that, they mastered movement, with the step of three energies. Basically, they had to relearn every single basic human function under Gija, even the proper way to walk. 3 long years flew by before the master gathered them, revealing that these techniques could elevate them to the realm of martial gods. Over the next 7 years, they had to master these arts so they could eventually unlock and cross through that mysterious gateway. They had to train relentlessly without a single doubt to stop the dark calamity threatening their world. Soon after, they were sealed inside the pitch-black cave. The young boy knew he had to survive this absolute living hell. This entire ordeal was because of Gisha. Obediently, they trained day and night inside the cave. The thick mist filling the cavern was actually pure, condensed energy, helping their skills improve with every passing day. Now pay attention, because here's where space literally starts cracking open, unleashing some truly terrifying portals. Fierce demonic beasts suddenly swarmed the cave. They stared right into the gates of hell itself. It was a brutal, nightmarish struggle just to stay alive. The legendary three energies techniques saved him, but tragically, not a single soul besides our boy managed to make it out alive. He was the sole survivor, the chosen one. He remembered his name, Dan Henu. Sometime later, at the Cloud Pavilion, Dan walked into a busy tavern, immediately catching the eye of a high-born noblewoman. Her personal guard pointed out that the stranger carried an unsheathed blade. Another ally noticed that the weapon looked incredibly high tier. Dan finally sat down to eat. He truly had no clue how many years had gone by since his last real meal. He devoured his food so passionately that nearby guests ordered the same thing. Still, the young lady couldn't look away from this mysterious warrior. Once he finished eating, the tavern waiter stepped up with the bill. I know what you're thinking. Who forgets money? Well, this guy was trapped in a cave for 10 years. Dan bluntly said he had zero cash. The angry waiter demanded his sword instead, but Dan absolutely refused to hand it over. This blade represented the sacrifice of his very last friend. Believing he was a dine and dasher, the angry staff prepared to take it by force. Suddenly, the noble lady stepped forward with her coin pouch, offering to cover his entire bill. She approached Dan, who quietly asked why she helped him, realizing he should probably say something polite. Looking closely into his eyes, she saw a pure, childlike innocence, like someone discovering the world for the very first time. Dan struggled to find the words, then just walked away. Onlookers scoffed at his complete lack of basic manners. Her brother found it highly offensive, calling the strange wanderer an ungrateful, rude beggar. But she noticed his masterfully crafted sword, realizing that carrying such a legendary weapon without a sheath would draw unwanted trouble. Determined to gift him a proper scabbard, she followed him. Meanwhile, Dan finally realized on the streets that he forgot to say thank you. Later, back at the Cloud Pavilion, the entire building was packed with powerful cultivators. The noble lady was revealed as Jo Se Ho-hun. She remarked that the sheer reach of the Murim alliance was jaw-dropping. Her brother, Jo In-henan, the young master of their clan, fully agreed with her. And trust me, you and I are about to see what the leader of the escort agency, Sima Chal, does next. Alright, you and I are starting with the Orthodox faction and forest bandits racing to Hangshan, and that is just the beginning. The real reason behind this massive gathering? The legendary reputation of one single man. Chungija, the most powerful master in the Muram world, possessed godlike wisdom. He mastered secret weapon techniques, ultimate martial arts, and could even read the stars. In his final years, Chungija forged a deadlier art called the Shadow Lightning Blade, driving the entire world mad with his secret techniques. He passed this ultimate style to a lowly beggar, turning him into a supreme master in just 3 years. That beggar master was eventually branded a public enemy and met a brutal, tragic end. But his death only made everyone more obsessed with Chungija and his legendary skills. Afterward, countless Muram factions hunted for the creator himself, but he vanished without leaving a single trace. Sim Michel believed the Zhou clan leader had found a map to Chungiha's secret martial art, making it completely natural for the entire Muram world to hunt it down. He figured that since they were escorting the leader for the Zhou clan, they would stay relatively safe. Even so, they had to stay on guard. In this chaotic world, the unexpected can strike at any moment. Right then, Dan walked into the restaurant, setting things in motion. Joyne asked if she was seriously going to follow that strange beggar. He was totally against it, arguing the guy was a rude, shameless stranger who had nothing to do with her. He warned that her kindness was wasted. Simmel agreed, saying wandering off alone right now was dangerous, especially with their leader arriving soon. So, Hyun simply smiled and replied that she would stay put with them. Meanwhile, Dan was wandering aimlessly through the bustling, crowded city, watching the busy merchants and street performers. Everything felt warm and peaceful, but pay attention here, this happy scene only triggers a dark memory from his past. He and his best friend had sworn an oath to escape that hellhole alive. Exigi had made him promise one critical thing. If they survived, they had to find his father. Dan insisted that he would be the one to deliver the message. Axie agreed, begging him not to die. But that day, Dan was careless, and a deadly beast nearly took his life. But Axie threw himself in front of the blow. Dan screamed at him to get up, demanding to know why he did it when they promised to see his father. Axie gasped that Dan was the strongest of them all, so he had to survive and tell his father how sorry he was. Staring up at the glowing full moon, Dan knew his freedom had been paid for with the blood of 99 comrades. He owed them everything and swore he would make Kawangija pay for what he did. After wandering the streets, he eventually ended up right back at that same restaurant. The girl was still there, but check this out. As night fell, a massive army of martial artists set out, and she went with them. So Dan decided to trail them. Deep into the night, the caravan halted in a dense forest, resting just outside the borders of Henan. Dan realized they were heading straight toward his homeland. The factions tailing them were moving there too. They were all hunting for the exact same treasure. Among them was Jigal Jung Chun, the clever advisor of the Muram alliance, conversing quietly with their leader, Du Woon. Du warned that the unorthodox alliance and the brutal Green Forest bandits were suddenly making strange moves, causing major concern during these dangerous times. Jagal assured him not to worry, since intel showed those rival groups were pursuing an entirely different objective. Du sighed, muttering that his old instincts must be getting rusty. Meanwhile, a few greedy warriors tried to approach Sehon, particularly Pang of the Flying Dragon, who eagerly asked if she was exhausted and needed to rest. Her brother snapped back that they were fine and told them to back off. Suddenly, a gang of ruthless bandits ambushed them. It was the feared Green Forest bandits, led by the blood-sucking demon himself, mocking that they hidden well, but not well enough. The leader barked orders to prepare for battle. The advisor warned him to be careful, as the unorthodox alliance had joined forces with them. Du knew the blood-sucking demon was an elite martial master, incredibly deadly to face in combat. The moment clash began, the blood-sucking demon slaughtered low-tier warriors, snapping necks with heavy kicks and swinging his massive blade. Having wiped out the weaklings, he charged directly at Du Woon, their heavy blades clashing with absolute fury. While their men slaughtered one another, the Muram alliance was clearly losing ground, completely overwhelmed by numbers. The blood-sucking demon laughed, mocking their struggles while declaring that the secret weapon left by Gija belonged to his faction. Hiding nearby, Dan froze. Did he really just hear the name Gija? In a flash, he jammed his sword under a massive rock and launched it into the fray. He shattered it into flying shrapnel, blindsiding the enemy. You and I just witnessed an absolute beast unleash his fury. You and I are diving straight into the heat of battle as he casually asks for Giza, leaving Du shocked he never even sensed him. The advisor thanks him for saving them, but wonders why he wants Giza, considering the man died 10 years ago. Dan stands frozen, unable to believe Giza is dead before he could even avenge the brutal murders of his closest friends. Right then, A terrifying void energy begins erupting wildly from Dan's body, forcing the Merm Alliance warriors to freeze in absolute terror, swallowed by his overwhelming aura. Dan had survived unspeakable horrors to escape that living hell. But now, his target is already dead. After everything he went through, after watching everyone die around him, and urging him on to vengeance, yet the Alliance leader manages to resist the crushing void energy, realizing he must stop this instantly. If he does not, his entire crew will suffer severe energy deviation. Just then, the young lady, Se-ho Hyun, the same girl who once showed him kindness, steps forward to speak to him. Looking at her, Dan remembers that he only survived that hellish place thanks to his comrades' pure warmth. With Giza gone, his vengeance is lost. Maybe he should search elsewhere. Suddenly, the suffocating void energy vanishes without a trace. Watch this closely, the warriors instantly recover, leaving even the mighty Alliance leader totally stunned. Du knows that even peak martial masters struggle to suppress such raw power, making him wonder who this kid really is. Se-ho Hen asks Dan if he is looking for someone, reminding her uncle that this mysterious boy just saved their lives, and suggests they all travel together to find him. Hearing this makes Sema look pretty nervous. It is tough to reject a savior, but after his dark energy rattled the Murmur Alliance fighters, there is no telling if the Alliance leader will actually agree to let him tag along. Du realizes this kid could slaughter the Green Forest bandits in a heartbeat, which makes him incredibly dangerous to keep around. But given their heavy losses, keeping a monster like him close by might actually be their best bet. The Alliance leader finally nods yes. Sema then offers Dan a job at the escort agency, leaving the nearby warriors speechless because that is a massive opportunity. Dan hesitates, while Join scoffs, saying their agency is not some cheap place for just anyone. Dan bluntly replies that he would answer, but he does not even know what an escort agency actually is. Everyone looks totally baffled before the old man explains that they basically guard clients and transport valuable goods. A arrogant flying dragon warrior sneers, asking where this clueless country bumpkin even came from. But Pong points out Dan's worn sword, sensing the absolute ocean of killing intent bleeding from it. Realizing this legendary blade is totally wasted on a hillbilly, with too many eyes watching, they decide to steal it once the leader enters Hangan. We finally arrive at Hangan. But look, as the sun rises, everyone instantly senses something incredibly off about the area. Dan silently wonders what they are seeking, since he literally just left that spot. Meanwhile, the leader eagerly asks about Geisha's secret manual. The advisor sighs, admitting they have not even found the hidden cave entrance yet. They search everywhere in vain, prompting the advisor to suggest slicing the mountain apart, though Du fears that might destroy the manual. Dan quietly remembers that his old home already collapsed because he literally sliced the place in half himself. To find Giza's original entrance, he focuses on tracing the faint, residual energy Giza left behind. Walking past the frustrated warriors, he easily uncovers the hidden entrance on his own. Du asks how he found it so fast, and Dan casually replies that he used to live there. Pang sneers, calling him a mountain savage who carries a sheathless sword. Du announces that only himself, the advisor, and the flying dragon leader will enter the cave. While the rest guard the perimeter, he thanks Dan, saying they owe him. But Dan coldly warns him that only memories of death await inside. Sensing the kid's dark mood, Du tells him to back off and let them handle the rest. As they march inside, Dan accepts that Gija is truly gone, losing all interest in whatever secrets they might uncover. Seoan steps closer, asking if he really lived there, but the flying dragon squad suddenly surrounds them, deliberately blocking Dan's path. The brute claims he might be a bandit spy, but she defends him, though Pang sneers that she is way too naive. Another thug sneers that if he is innocent, they must confiscate his sword first. That old blade radiates legendary energy. They demand he hand it over, and trust me, you and I know a bloodbath is coming. You and I are jumping right in as Dan refuses to yield his late friend's blade, boldly daring them to step over his cold corpse if they want to take it. Without a second thought, the two flying dragon warriors charge. Dan immediately reads their play, a coordinated pincer attack to flank him. His plan? Dodge and slice them both down in one clean motion. He had their moves completely mapped out. But before he can cleave them in two, the Alliance leader barks an order to halt and stand guard. Whispers spread. Did they actually find Giza's legendary secret weapon? Du commands everyone to back off, declaring the mission finished. Ping sneers at the country boy to count his blessings. Meanwhile, Sihan looks anxious, leaving Dan totally confused when she claims everything is fine. She admits she was deeply anxious, suddenly realizing they still have not properly introduced themselves. Once names are exchanged, she steps closer, whispering that they must prepare to make their exit. With that, the Murim Alliance's search for Giza's secret weapon finally draws to a temporary close. Over in Hubei province, wild rumors are spreading that the Murim Alliance secured Giza's ultimate weapon to conquer the entire world. Everyone is talking, watch closely. But at the main Murim Alliance headquarters, the leader DGO calls it pure madness, knowing nobody would believe them even if they told the truth that the weapon is a myth. Sitting in an emergency council with the elders, he faces a massive problem they found absolutely nothing. Yet, the lies are already out of control. Inside that Hangan cave, all they uncovered was a dusty wooden box left by Gija, holding a single letter. The letter warned of a terrifying figure, the blood demon destined to shake the foundations of this entire era, plunging all of Jianghu into absolute chaos. To stop him, Gija assembled 100 peerless martial masters, begging they to unleash to execute the demon, and to control such legendary warriors. The yin-yang parasite hidden inside the box was absolutely essential. Gija promised that with this, the blood demon could never escape. Sure enough, when Du opened the chest, there sat the orb holding the parasite. But here is the shocker, there was absolutely no sign of those 100 elite martial artists mentioned in the scroll. One elder asks if this was all just some mad joke left behind by Giza. Du counters, arguing that an unseen force is pulling the strings. There are too many red flags here, especially with what happened back in Henshin. The forest bandits did not actually care about Gaia's secret weapon. Their true goal was to cripple the Murim Alliance itself. They never even looked for the weapon. Du admits they found zero evidence of it in Henshan, and the massive pile of missing corpses is all the proof he needs. Now, you and I can see those market rumors snowballing fast, deliberately forcing all of Jianghu's attention straight onto the Murim Alliance. The elders demand to know who is behind this. One suggests pointing fingers at the Zhou clan leader, since he delivered the map in the first place. Du admits he doesn't trust the man either, but warns there could easily be a double agent hiding inside the Zhou clan. With things spiraling out of control, they must dispatch a capable agent to closely monitor the Zhou clan, because even if the clan is innocent, they might just be puppets manipulated by cunning merchant factions. Back at the Grand Zhou clan estate, the escort leader finally returns with the young master and lady, bringing Dan right along with them. Dan is blown away by the size of the place. Sema leaves to brief the chief, directing his men to guide Dan to the agency. Along the way, she had wanted to buy him a new sheath. Dan silently complains that people here are weirdly obsessed with sheaths, and it makes absolutely no sense to him. Seohyun points out his current sheath is completely falling apart, warning that even the finest scabbard cannot contain the raw, devastating energy radiating from his blade. Right on cue, his old sheath shatters to pieces. Dan casually brushes it off, insisting he is perfectly fine without one. Seohyun softly apologizes to him for breaking her promise to craft him a proper scabbard. Dan wonders why she is saying sorry, a painful reminder of his late companion's final words as he lay dying. He coldly tells her never to apologize again, Snap refusing to ever hear those words. She is left completely stunned. Sema calls out for Dan to hurry up, leaving Seohyun behind, quietly worrying if she somehow offended him. Arriving at the Renan agency, Dan spots dozens of hardworking porters sweating over heavy cargo and manual labor. Sema strides through the busy yard, introducing Dan to Zhongchil as their newest recruit and demanding he show him the ropes. Zhongchil grins, promising to give him a tough time. Sema warns Dan that the guy is brutal, wishing him the best of luck. Smirking, Zhongchil warns that despite being hand-picked by the boss, Dan gets zero special treatment and will suffer through the same grueling rookie training as everyone else. He demands his name, and Dan bluntly introduces himself. Trust me, it is going down. Alright, let's dive in. Zhongch asks why he is speaking so coldly, and Dan says his limbs are just too short. Zhongch snaps back, asking if he is trying to pick a fight and if he wants to die on his very first day. Sensing the pure malice, Dan actually wonders if he should just end this guy right here and now, slowly sliding his hand onto his sword hilt. Zhongch scoffs, asking since when mere porters carry blades, and demands he hand it over immediately. Dan just says no. Hit with that heavy wave of sudden killing intent, poor Zhongch immediately backs down. He claims they are done for today because it is late, and says training will start tomorrow morning. Dan finds it weird how many people want his sword. Meanwhile, the other porters celebrate because Zhongch backed down to the new guy, before everyone heads off to sleep. Jingchil, however, lies awake, steaming, plotting how he will make Dan pay for that utter humiliation once he gets past that sword. Later that night, while the entire camp is fast asleep, now watch this part carefully. Zhongch creeps out to find the newcomer, thinking he is asleep nearby, only to run straight into Dan, asking why he is awake. He then realizes Dan actually has his eyes closed, sleeping soundly while standing upright. Jing Chil tries to snatch the sword, but the moment Dan opens his eyes, the poor porter completely freezes in terror. Just for a second, Jong Chil literally sees his own death and feels the raw terror of prey before a predator, desperately begging for forgiveness. Dan simply closes his eyes again. He was only circulating his internal energy as a natural defense mechanism. That bizarre habit of sleeping on his feet started during his long, brutal years in the cave, living in constant, deadly alert. Whether resting, eating, or sleeping, he never lowers his guard. The next morning, Dan wakes Junk, who instantly bolts away in sheer terror. The other porters wake up early to start working, but they are absolutely stunned by Dan's crazy physical abilities. He effortlessly moves heavy crates with his hands and feet, perfectly channeling the natural flow of the wind. He is incredibly strong and agile, stacking crates like they weigh nothing. The other porters tell him to watch out, but he keeps effortlessly clearing everything, basically doing all the work himself. The young lady hears all about his insane work from one of the porters, and during her quiet break, she finds herself remembering everything Dan told her yesterday. I know what you're thinking, she wants to apologize without actually apologizing, which honestly makes the whole situation feel pretty weird to her. She was so obsessed with the meaning of his words that she barely slept. So, the moment he walks by, she blushes. Dan mentions he has officially started working as a porter. She asks if he likes it, but that was not her real question, and her courage completely fades. Dan simply replies that he values peace, and what he hates most is when that peace is shattered. He adds that hearing a friend apologize is deeply unpleasant. Seo realizes he considers her a friend, and softly replies that everything is fine. She promises she will never say that again. Just then, Ping appears, calling it a total coincidence, and shamelessly compliments Miss Zhou on becoming even more beautiful since they last met. She asks why he is hanging around here, instead of handling important Murim alliance matters. He replies that he received another mission to provide the absolute maximum support to her escort agency. But despite Dan wanting simple peace and quiet, the Murim world is on the absolute brink of a bloody war. Meanwhile, the Lord of the Celestial Watch hears that 30 of his elite members were wiped out. A lone survivor begs for mercy, crying that they could not even identify who was behind the brutal slaughter. The leader demands to know how his legendary Celestial Watch force, capable of crushing the Murim Alliance's Black Tortoise unit, was completely wiped out. Then, unleashing his power, he makes the corpses float, drawing the blood straight out of them, and concludes they were all slaughtered by a single person. It must be Gija. It must be one of the terrifying monsters he created, though he doubts if that is enough to actually defeat the legendary blood demon. He is incredibly eager to find out. He orders his direct subordinate to investigate every single person traveling with the Murim Alliance at Hangan, swearing to hunt down whoever destroyed his force. Meanwhile, Sioan stares at the flying dragon group. Pang thinks she is absolutely breathtaking, but wonders why she hangs around a sword-carrying porter, calling it completely ridiculous. Soan worries that since the Flying Dragon Group represents the Alliance, if they start trouble, poor Dan will be the one who ends up suffering. So, she kindly tells him to ignore everything Pang just said. Pang demands to know how they are so close, while his sister Mirang watchfully looks on. And you and I both know she is wondering if he ran here the moment orders came down just to see her, calling him a total show-off. But just then, another warrior approaches, asking for Dan, and noting how great it is that Miss Zhou is present. He introduces himself as Helm Pio, an escort warrior sent directly by the leader to train our mysterious new porter. You and I are jumping into a story about a rookie sent on an escort mission. Pang told him it is their literal job, and a perfect chance to get close to So Hyun. Dan asked what an escort mission even meant since he had no idea, but he refused to give up his sword. Pio just laughed it off and told him to follow along. Meanwhile, the Flying Dragon Group was already praying this poor newbie would get fired. Mirang sighed, thinking even a powerful vice leader could act like a total child over a pretty woman. But she noticed Dan did not even blink at the provocation, as Sohan asked if he was really leaving. Mirang assumed he was just some ordinary loser for backing down, but Dan simply insisted he had to follow Pio because he could not get fired. Pio recalled his orders from Sema. Junk was supposed to teach Dan the ropes of being a porter, but Pio had to ensure the kid did not cause any trouble. He knew they wanted to make Dan quit before he could get close to Seo Han, but Pio still wondered why he had to be the one to do it. Sema simply told him he would understand once they met. Now, pay attention here. Pio could ignore how Dan spoke since he was from the mountains, but a porter carrying a sheathless sword? That was just way too weird. He asked if Dan practiced any swordsmanship. Dan calmly replied that he used the art of the three energies. Pio figured he was just a delusional kid dreaming of being a warrior, pointing out that while the three energies style was basic, far better martial arts existed. So he drew his blade to show off his own skills, challenging Dan to show what he could do with his basic style. Dan asked if they were actually fighting to the death. Pio chuckled and said it was just a friendly sparring match to test their limits. But Dan bluntly replied that he was already way stronger, so there was really no point in testing it. Pio scoffed, asking how a simple porter could claim that against someone who had trained his entire life. Still, he admired the rookie's sheer confidence and promised to show him what real strength looked like. That is when Dan raised his arm to measure the distance, admitting it was his first time trying not to kill an opponent. He had to calculate his strike very carefully. He stepped closer, carefully sizing up Pio's vital spots before nodding to himself that he was good to go. As Dan prepared to avoid killing him, you and I can see Pio realizing why the leader called this kid strange. Before Pio could even swing, Dan had already read his stance and predicted his entire attack trajectory. He casually sidestepped the blow and countered with a devastating downward strike that hit like absolute thunder. Pio was barely grazed but still got knocked out, thinking that was no basic sword style. When he woke up, Dan asked if it hurt a lot. Shocked, Pio asked what kind of godly martial arts that was. Dan simply said it was just a three energies technique called Heavenly Thunder. Pio yelled that it looked nothing like the basic style, completely unable to process what this legendary technique even was. He never expected this random porter to be a martial arts master, and suspected even their agency leader had no clue. Dan innocently asked if Pio's skills were still superior, leaving Pio dumbfounded by how naive this absolute monster was. He knew he had to report this to the chief, but first, he needed to teach Dan some basic common sense. He offered his hand, but Dan just stood there. Pio had to explain that a handshake was meant to help someone up, so Dan finally pulled him to his feet. So, Dan moved into Pio's place, getting a crash course on civilized life. Pio was utterly baffled to find him sleeping while standing straight up. Pio patiently retaught Dan all the basic skills he had lost after being trapped inside a dark cave for years, teaching him how to read, write, and even basic decency, like where to undress. Over time, as a porter under Pio, Dan slowly began to open up, but Mirang kept a sharp eye on him, since her faction, the Flying Dragons, was specifically sent to spy on the Zhou clan. However, she quickly realized her most important mission was keeping a close watch on this bizarre kid. Even then, he did not seem dangerous, just a weird show-off, though she did catch So-hun constantly staring at him. Talk about unique taste. Before long, Dan officially became a full-fledged member of the Renan escort agency. And finally, the day of their high-stakes mission arrived, with Sima urging their captain, Mada, to bring everyone back safely. Mada, a legendary veteran fighter of the agency, told him not to sweat it, promising to protect their reputation as he rode out to lead the vanguard. Carriages followed alongside guards and porters, marking the true beginning of Dan's journey in the civilized world.